is fine. A mortar is fine. But if you get into a legitimate gunfight, there's something that you need called a machine gun, and you need a few of them. And they don't have any. Not good. Moreover, it had been agreed that as promptly as the descending company passed beyond the range of the platoon, that the platoon would be lifted out by chopper. Alpha Company had 100 or so mortar rounds behind. Kirby reckoned he would not need them. Caston, the reporter, had decided to stay on Hereford instead of moving with the company column. It's an interesting decision. It's an interesting decision because if you would think if you're looking to get in the fight, you would, they're going to go with the patrol. Like I'm sitting on this kind of LZ. It's almost like a little bit secure, and these guys are going to go on patrol. I would probably think I'd go on patrol. Caston, for whatever reason, he says he decides to stay up there on Hereford. And it's Kirby, the sergeant, who says it will happen here, if anywhere. That's Caston that says to Kirby, it will happen here, if anywhere. Like, we're going to get in combat. And Kirby says, about that, you're dead wrong. And he honestly felt that way, though, as he looked about, what he saw of his position hardly warranted such assurance. It was all wrong from any reasoned tactical view. So now this is Kirby. He's looking at the situation, even though he says, it's not going to happen here. He knows it's all wrong from a tactical perspective. The landing zone at Hereford was by then a burned-off, trampled, and rubble-strewn about the size of a professional basketball court. Running lengthwise down the edge of a ridge, its scorched earth and grasses were less apparent than the foxholes distributed more or less evenly around the oval-shaped perimeter. Originally, these had been enemy spider holes and were subsequently enlarged by American occupancy. The trouble was that Kirby did not have enough men to round out his holding. So the position became a U pointed up upslope. And again, this is where you can see the similarity here from the manual. The uphill open end fronting toward the high ground was not covered by weapons present since the platoon was sighting its pieces downslope, the company having gone that way and weapons platoon. So they have a U shape and they're like, well, the platoon went that way, so we don't really need to have much there. And that's where he decided to put light and not any protection in that direction. In neither direction was the prospect of a fight, was the prospect good if a fight was to be forthcoming. There was beauty everywhere, but there was beauty everywhere to soothe the eye. Upslope and bordering the very edge of the defended ground was a sea of elephant grass standing 6 to 8 feet tall. Downhill, there was a sheer and rocky precipice extending 30 feet and giving way to an extension in the field of tall grasses, which also invested the flanks. Greenness was all about except where the men looked to their weapons. The company took off down. So now here goes the company. The company took off down the steep, clutching to the rocks, creepers for balance. No preparatory artillery fires or airstrikes had been put on the slopes around Hereford because of Warren's movement, the earlier presence of Alpha Company, and the all-round feeling that Crazy Horse operation was slowing to a halt. This operation had been going on for a pretty long period of time. There's been all kinds of activity. They didn't feel like they needed to do any preparatory fire for this patrol. Kirby worried less about his platoon than about the movements and enterprise of Caston, the reporter. The men had gone to ground. The correspondent was moving from position to position, standing erect, taking photographs, and asking numerous questions. Wanting to protect Caston, he did not know how to object his freewheeling, though he realized that his movements were describing the limitations of the force. In fact, these things little mattered. Caston was enjoying himself hugely. He asked Kirby, how do you feel about these things? Kirby answered, if you think you're going to get a story out of this platoon, you're wrong. Nothing will happen here. Caston continued with his rounds of the perimeter, snapping pictures and asking the men, how do you feel? Kirby lost interest and Caston kept moving. The position of one mortar was near the bottom of the sloped LZ, just inside the U, where the crew had dug a little pit. At approximately 1300, the platoon began supporting the descending company with the fire of the 81 millimeter mortar, the range 800 meters. It takes a while to hack through the jungle. Captain Warren got Kirby on the radio and told him bring it closer, which Kirby tried to do. So now you got the platoons up there. They're dropping mortars in front of the platoon that's driving through the jungle. An hour later, Warren called Kirby again. This time the message was an uplift. Said Warren, choppers are incoming to take you out within 30 minutes. So they're just about done. So just to recap, you've got the platoon, you've got the mortar platoon in this landing zone. You've got the rest of the company pushed down the hill, and they're just on a patrol. And eventually they're so far away that there's no point in the mortar platoon being up there anymore. So now helicopters are going to come, grab them, and take them out. 30 minutes. That was what Warren and Kirby both thought, but the choppers had put down at landing zone Savoy, Hennessy's command post in the valley, just to make certain that the orders given still stood. From their delay, wholly unfaultable, came rocking General Jack Norton, rocking the high command, rocking us all. Kirby got off his 17th mortar round in support of the advancing company, that being the last one he fired. Remember, they had 18 rounds. He just fired his 17th round. Then the thing happened. There was no advance warning. Sergeant Lewis Buckley and PFC Wade Taste were still collecting the company water cans and other materiel for the flight, moving carelessly in the open, even as was Correspondent Caston. The other men, including Kirby, stayed put in their foxholes. That they did so was less a sign of their alertness than of their forthcoming operational routine. Once lodged in position, they had not moved to scout its surroundings. The long trek via the jungle trail had them half bushed. So they're tired. Over much of the distance they had to move, they were crouching because of the tiny overhang. There was no shade where they were sprawled. The sun beat directly down on them, and it was not less than 100 degrees. The word was passed from hole to hole that they were returning to home base, nothing much else. Not even the eccentric movements and questions of Castan interested them. The hour must have been about 13:30. From upslope and from not more than 50 yards away came the fire of a heavy machine gun. Its bullet stream was dead on the mortar, the first rounds ripping through the tube as if the weapon had already been zeroed in. Thereafter, it beat directly on the mortar pit with never a pause. So came Kirby's first warning that he was engaged. He yelled out, "Fire!" But it was superfluous. Though he did not know it, being too close to the mortar, a split second before Kirby had reacted, his own men had started the fight. On the left of the inverted U, it would have been the right flank had these men been facing uphill whence the fire was. Specs 4, Paul J. Harrison and Charles Stuckey had seen 3 enemy skirmishers moving in through the elephant grass, not 5 meters beyond their foxholes. Their M16 fire signaled the detection of movement, to which the enemy machine gun instantly responded. As swiftly as those 3 weapons spoke from the elephant grass on 3 sides of the perimeter rifle, fire cracked, and Kirby sensed that his position was almost totally enveloped. So he gets the feeling that we're surrounded. He yelled to his radio man, Spec 4 John F. Spranza, "Call company, get them back, we're being hit." As the message was relayed to Captain Warren, and as he remembered it, the words were, "Come back, we're being hit." Though the main body moving through the jungle was too far down the slope to get the sounds of the fight, Warren had his moment of agonized shock. And that's an interesting tidbit. A moment of agonized shock. Almost as if he may have expected that this would happen. He knew Kirby as a thoroughly brave soldier. And this is the unnamed person from the manual. Too steady, too seasoned to be stampeded by a little random fire. When he called for help, the thing had to be fully desperate. The confidence between the white captain from Georgia and the Negro sergeant from California was complete. So these guys had trust. Wasting not an instant, Warren called back on the radio to Lieutenant Robert McClellan of 1st Platoon, bringing up the rear of the far stretch column. "Get your ass back up that hill." All hands reversed and started scrambling upward. Men clutching at rocks, tearing their palms on thorned vines, sliding, falling, and panting in desperate effort to race up the steep. All did not fully understand the reason why. There was no attempt to observe security, and had they been, without knowing, moving into an ambush, the disaster that Two soon followed, could have been even greater. Far above them on the slope of Hereford, men who still moved crouched below to escape the sheet of fire beating from all sides. Most of Kirby's men had died in the first 10 minutes, though he did not know that yet. The return fire from his people grew steadily fainter. Sergeant Isaac Johnson, a 27-year-old Negro, had been sitting with a clapboard at the mortar pit when the fight began. He heard someone yell, "They're coming out of the woods." In his agitation, he tried to turn the mortar around to fire it uphill, not even noticing that it had been drilled through. The incoming fire was too great and his strength too little, so he slithered up on his belly to the left flank and dropped into a foxhole. Upslope, he could see 40 to 50 men at a run out of the trees into the elephant grass, where he lost sight of them. They were partially camouflaged and their shirts were of all colors. Looking downhill, he saw many more of the enemy moving through the grass, some crawling, others hunched over, firing as they moved in. It came to him as a sudden idea that he should fire too. He thought as he fired, he had dropped at least 4 enemy skirmishers with his M16. So, by the way, I mean, we're already talking about a totally outnumbered force. In one flank, he sees 40 or 50 bad guys. From the next foxhole above him, PFC Henry Benton and Joe L. Tamayo were alternately firing upslope and downhill, yelling as they pulled the trigger. Johnson saw his last of them when he ran out of ammunition and crawled back to the mortar pit in search of a magazine. Inside the pit, there were 4 men, heads down. The enemy machine gun and at least 2 automatic rifles were bearing directly on the hole and smashing its rim. Johnson could not be sure whether the men were ducking or dead. Sergeant Buckaloo, Paul Buckaloo, 22 years in the Army, was having his first go in combat. The opening barrage cracked him wide open. He bolted straight across the perimeter, vanished into the elephant grass, and was never heard from again. Sergeant Johnson couldn't find his spare magazine, so he picked up an M16 with 15 rounds in it from the dead hand of Sergeant Edward Shepard, who had no business being there that afternoon. Though he ranked Kirby and might have taken command, he was overdue to be lifted out by Chopper for an appearance before a promotion board, so he passed up the honor and died inconspicuously from a bullet through his brain. Another long-time soldier under fire for the first time, he had stayed motionless, petrified by personal terror, as boundless as the horror exploding all about him. His 15 bullets gone, Johnson crawled toward the mortar pit, screaming, "Come out, you'll all be killed." There was no response. It was minutes too late for that. The hole held 4 corpses, heads bashed in by bullet fire. In the nearby hole with Kirby was another bloody welter, a rocket, the Russian-made P-40, a round of so slow of motion that the eye easily follows the trajectory, came arcing in dead center of the mark. Kirby saw it in flight and yelled, "Watch out!" So did his foxhole mates, Spec 4 Austin L. Drummond and David S. Crocker, who cried warning in the same split second. Before any man could move, the rocket exploded just to the left of the hole. Crocker died instantly from a shard that crushed in his skull. Drummond took heavy fragments in the left arm and left leg. Such gouts of blood spouted from him that Kirby, who had taken 4 pieces of steel in his head but remained conscious, knew that Drummond could not last long. In physical torment, Drummond tried to rise. Kirby pulled at him. Drummond screamed, "Let me go. I'm hurting, hurting." Kirby pulled him down. Within a minute, he died under Kirby's body. Blood from Kirby's pate was streaming into his eyes, but the little sergeant could still see and think. He yelled to his RTO, Spec 4 Speranza, "Call company, say I'm being hit by mortars and rockets. We gotta have gunships and arty." Speranza did his part. Captain Warren, struggling uphill, remembered this piece of the message coming in. "We're hit by rockets and mortars." Later he could not recall that Speranza had also asked for gunfire and air artillery. But anyhow, he relayed that message to the command capsule at LZ Savoy, and Speranza got the word back from him, "It's on the way." Those were his final words. Right then, communication between the company and platoon ended. Both radios worked. The mass